ATPI, delivering what really matters.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Speed Freaks Chat Show with myself, Scott Nicholls, and as always, Steve Brandon, all brought to you by ATPI Travel, our corporate sponsors now. This is the last episode in Series 1, and what a guest we've got for you. Such a speed freak himself, he's come out of retirement to get that buzz again. Who are we talking about, Brando?
Thanks, Scotty. Morning. Our guest today is none other than the Ipswich Witches and Plymouth Gladiators, three-time world champion, Jason Crump.
Thanks, guys.
How are you?
Yeah, pretty good. It's been a long season and it's kind of drawing to a close for me now. So it's I'm feeling a little bit more relaxed.
How's the body at this stage of the season? Because everyone knows earlier in the season it got beat up pretty hard.
It did. It's not great. Obviously, I'm reasonably fit enough to ride, but probably nowhere near 100%, which has been unfortunate. You know, the rib problems, it affects you in a funny way. You know, Scott, I was talking to you the other night at Peterborough and said, you know, there's positions I can't get in on the bike. Still, hopefully, with a bit more rehab and a bit of time, that will come back to me. But unfortunately, the grey hairs show that age isn't on my side with that.
We like to talk about how you come into all the racing stuff, but as you just mentioned there about you being in good shape and everything else, that's something I want to actually ask you more about. The sort of closer past was, like myself, you weren't one of the flyweights of the racing world, but you were unbelievably successful. You're a world champion. But then there was a point where you did drop a lot of weight. You got your fitness on point. What was the inspiration behind that? Was it something that happened, or you saw somebody else and it kind of triggered something in you, or was it just something off your own back you wanted to do?
I think there was a whole group of us, Scott, as you said, that, you know, all of a sudden there was these really small little guys that came onto the scene, and they were, you know, fantastic riders, but they were bloody hard to beat. And when you're aiming for the world championship, if it means that you've got to drop 3, 5, 8 kilos, to me, at that point in my life, it didn't matter. It was just something that I had to do, and whatever had to happen for that to happen was just part of winning the world championship. So you build it into your preparation. And yeah, I wouldn't have said there was a few years there where I was probably lighter than I should have been, probably wasn't as healthy as I could have been, but I definitely hit the weight I wanted to, and probably got a world championship or two out of it. So when I look back and think that, did I miss eating a bit of cake with the kids when I went to a birthday party? Yeah, I did at the time, but as long as I went to the Grand Prix on Saturday and got points, then I was okay with it.
Do you feel that, keeping with the current then, that now kind of the era when you were racing, obviously the weight, or you're still racing, but in the Grand Prix, the weight wasn't such a factor. Do you feel now that the way the engines are as well, and the Grand Prix tracks that we race on, that now is even more emphasis, and it's almost more now the rider that's got the good engine and that's a flyweight is winning? Do you think some of the skill and the track craft has sort of come away a little bit as a result of that?
No, I think that it's a big factor. I think it's definitely a huge factor in the package of who's winning and who's not. But there's not, when I look at Speedway Grand Prix now, I don't really see a bad rider. And that's not a new thing. You know, we looked at Speedway Grand Prix, my mate Andy Smith, Chris Harris, yourself, all you guys, a load of you took a load of crap from, you know, performances in the Grand Prix. But at the end of the day, Scott, if you've got 16 Tony Rickardsons or 16 Jason Crumps, one of those guys still has to come last in every race. And it's a difficult thing to understand. But you look at the Grand Prix now, and the young Swedish boy, right? he no doubt he takes a bit of stick, and he's having a tough time. Kasperzak the same. But last year, and you know this, last year when the chips were down and there was 3 spots to get in the Grand Prix at the Grand Prix Challenge, those guys stepped up, and they're the best of the next bunch, and they deserve their chance in the Grand Prix. We got a little bit off track of the weight side of things, but the Grand Prix now is, in my opinion, it's no different than it's ever been. The best guys in the world are in the Grand Prix. Some of them are small. You've still got Matty Zager in there, who's 6 foot whatever, and he can still pull a race out every now and then, like he could in 2006 or 2010. So yeah, it's a factor, but the skill level's the same, and the commitment of the top riders, in my opinion anyway, is the same.
We talk about this a lot, and we've talked about it through the whole series. In the cigarette paper of difference between outstanding and great, and is so small. But for people who maybe don't get the privilege of being in the pit lane or seeing a practice or seeing a Grand Prix up close, how hard is it, that environment, to perform 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 times a year?
It's a scary environment, actually. You go into the Grand Prix in the beginning, of course. Normally you end up in the Grand Prix for myself, I was quite young when I went into the Grand Prix, and you're quite inexperienced, and all of a sudden, for me, I went to Hackney as a wild card, as under 21 world champion, and yeah, you've raced against Hans and Sam and Mark and Chris and Tommy Knudsen and Tony. You've raced them, but all of a sudden you go into a different environment. You go into their environment. You go into their playground, and man, it's all of a sudden it's riders that you would walk past and stop and have a conversation with at a league match. They don't even bloody look at you when you walk past them at practice at a Grand Prix, and all of a sudden you go, I'm playing with the big boys now. So that side of it, the mental side of it, and the strain that I felt going into the Grand Prix and moving into that level of speedway back in the early days was tough, and I guarantee you it's no different now. Like I said, the Swedish boy Oliver, I'm sure that he doesn't probably feel all that comfortable in that environment. Robert Lambert, the same. He's a newcomer into the series. So as confident as you can be in your own ability, you still need a bit of time to be accepted by Smarslik and Laguta and Doyley and all the rest of them.
So a double-barreled question almost is, one, did you have to then work hard on the mental game? Because you said it's a massive change, and I think that's one of the biggest steps up. Like you said, you race against these guys week in, week out, but for some reason that Grand Prix environment is a proper pressure cooker. It makes you clam up, it makes riders ignore each other. But also then, do you feel that there should be another stepping stone towards the Grand Prix, like maybe competing in the SEC or something for a period of time to gain that experience?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think the SEC, the Speedway European Championship, I think you look at, Emil took time out of the Speedway Grand Prix and went into the SEC and got his desires or his hungers back. Leon Madsen was very successful in that and has gone on to have still having a successful Grand Prix career. And Robert last year, he performed really well in the SEC to get his spot in the Grand Prix. So I think it's a positive thing. I think it's a really good stepping stone. I mean, back years ago, Scott, we had the under 21 World Championship. That was all you had, wasn't it?
I think that's too early almost for a lot of riders anyway.
Yeah, possibly. I look back and, it took me a couple of years to get the under 21 World Championship worked out. And unfortunately, that was a little bit of a mirror of what it was going to take me to win the World Championship as well. But you learn a lot in those competitions because you race. It brings you, for example, I raced Screeny and Michael Carlson back then, Rooney Holter, different guys, Rafael De Broekie, Thomas Topinka. I raced against all those guys in under 21 competition. And really, it was a bit of put a name in the hat and see which ones are going to go on in Speedway, because at that age and that time in our career, we were all very similar.
How long did it take you? Because there's a lot of names there who went on to have really good, successful Grand Prix careers, international careers. How long did it take you to feel comfortable in the Grand Prix environment once you'd got in there and sort of established yourself?
Well, you were around quite a bit, Stephen, in my early days, living in Northampton, and, what were we, a couple of miles away from each other. Of course, we had Simon Wigg just down the road, so we were in a kind of a little speedway bubble there in where we were. And it was actually something that I spoke to Si about a lot. Obviously, I was lucky I had other friends around as well, to help people like yourself and Kev the Copper and people that I could talk to that could give me opinions on almost anything. It's kind of, I never felt 100% comfortable in the Grand Prix until you probably you make 3 or 4 finals in a row, or you get a bit of a run together, you win a couple of Grand Prix, and then it's almost like, I do fit here. I do feel, like I'm one of the players in the series, rather than just being somebody who could go and have a good meeting every 4 or 5 or half a dozen of them.
This is a really interesting question for me. You just said about that confidence and about building and feeling like you felt comfortable in that environment.
It goes one step further, Scott, as well, because then, you have that confidence. That's one stage of the building process. And the next stage of it is when, unfortunately for me, I've been in positions where I have dominated a series at different times. And at that time, you walk in the pits and you look at the others, and I felt that they shouldn't be there, and that's not an arrogant thing or anything. That's a position you build yourself into. And so in the space of maybe 10 or 12 years, you go from feeling that you don't fit into this environment to thinking, what the bloody hell are these guys doing here? They're coming to play in my game.
Okay. Was it the racing? Was it purely your performances that made you feel like that? So when you walked in the place, you was like, I own this place. This is my house. They're not coming to play in my house. Or did you, as a result of the experiences, did you feel that you ever had the ability to be able to switch that on and off? The reason I said, like someone like Tony, he just had this ability to be laughing and joking with you one second. The next minute it was like, there was a tunnel. There was like, hello, Tony, there's nothing there. Some riders have got that ability. Did you ever feel like you could do that?
Probably at different times with the riding, yes. The mental side of it, I think I was very consistent, that I could generally speak to people most of the time. Different things would happen at different Grand Prix, of course, but I agree with what you said about Tony. I mean, you could talk to Tony and you get an answer, and then 30 seconds later you're talking to a wall. And I had a tremendous amount of respect for Tony for being able to do that, because I could see he was obviously the guy that I had to beat for a number of years, or one of the guys I had to beat for a number of years, or try to beat. And the way he was approaching it was a completely different way that worked than anything that would work for me. I mean, for me to be right for a Grand Prix, I had to have Mel and the kids with me, which is probably 90% of riders wouldn't have been their build up. But for me, if they weren't there, for me, it just didn't feel right. It didn't work right. We had to go out for dinner on a Friday night, together as a family. And that was part of my build up.
When you said they were part of your package to make it feel right, and I totally get that. I was fairly similar in a way but so when you were at your peak, when you felt you were the dominant one, was there a feeling that you associated with kind of being in the zone, so to speak? Does that make sense? Like sometimes you just feel... I remember one time at a Grand Prix, there was a Grand Prix coming up and you were at Eastbourne, and I think you broke the track record in the first race, and it was like, holy he's not going to be beaten tonight. But there was an air about you. Was there a feeling like inside associated with that, or was it just purely the racing and that took over?
No, a little bit like that. I mean, I used to gauge my form, and you try and make sure. For some reason, I loved going to Ipswich before a Speedway Grand Prix. I hated riding in England on a Thursday night before a Grand Prix, unless it was Ipswich. And the old Ipswich track, as you know, was a tricky, good riders could go to Ipswich and struggle. And Ipswich was one of those tracks where I always felt if you went to Ipswich and got 15 points, you were riding good, your bike was working good, you were doing 99.9% of everything you were doing right. So yeah, I used to try and use the league meetings in England to build myself up for the Grand Prix. And at different points in my career, yeah, I could go to, most tracks in the UK and get myself worked up enough before a Grand Prix to go and get 15 points and go to a Grand Prix really happy. But the riders nowadays, they would probably argue and say that we did it wrong. But I always felt that a few meetings in the week of the Grand Prix was good. I wanted to ride. I wanted to get myself ready for the biggest meeting of the week by having a few warm-up meetings. Going and doing the Polish practice thing, of course, we've all had to go and do it. And, they're hard, they're difficult, but they're not a race meeting, are they? And it's just different.
Do you think now, looking at some riders at the top level of the sport, they don't race enough?
100%. 100%. And Ty, in my opinion, is Ty and Doyley are the two most obvious that I see it with. I don't know Robert enough, but Robert grew up in the UK, racing in the UK tracks. I think it goes a step further as well than just not racing enough. I think that if you look at it from a riding mechanics side, Ty and Doyley and Robert developed their techniques on British Speedway tracks. Now, British Speedway tracks are still, from first-hand experience, the toughest tracks with the most different surfaces, the most different gate positions, the most difficult angles and lengths of straights and size of corners that you can come across anywhere in the world. Ty developed his riding technique here. And this is not derogatory to Ty in any way. This is just my personal opinion of him and Doyley, actually, at the moment. They're both not at the top of their game, and I honestly think that they miss British Speedway. Doyle planned to ride here. We all know that. Ty probably didn't plan on riding here, but as I say, in my humble opinion, if I was Ty, I would be looking at getting back to getting the technique of riding Wolverhampton every Monday and taking that form with him into the Grand Prix, because for me, that makes him a better rider.
So would you like to see a different selection of tracks in the Grand Prix? Do you like the selection they've got at the moment in the Grand Prix, or do you think it would be better to have a more diverse selection?
Yeah, diverse 100%, Scott. I mean, the Grand Prix that are happening just now, we see the Danish Grand Prix at Voyens kind of threw up a few different surprises. I mean, Ty looked a lot better. Robert showed that he's got track craft and skill. Doyley had an unfortunate night. Max Frick rode pretty decent. But I say I don't like it. It's the way it has to be just now. But you throw Cardiff in there and Voyens or Parken in Denmark. They're smaller tracks and it's a completely different technique. So yeah, I like it when there's more variety of tracks than 3 or 4 double headers in Poland. But it's got to be dealt with the situation that we're in. We're lucky that we've got Speedway Grand Prix going still, because I still love to watch it, and the skill level of the riders has not gone down. It's not higher, it's not lower, it's the same. They ride as hard. We used to ride hard, things are different. The camera work now, I mean, the angles that we get from the cameras, and we can see what the guys are doing on the bike so much more. It's really, really good to watch. I love watching it. I mean, Zmarzlik's, I've said it myself, Zmarzlik's different level, but Artem Laguta's like the most casual, armchair sort of guy, but geez, making it work at the moment.
When you mention the difference of a Cardiff or a Parkin, I mean, you dominated Parkin for a long time, and I actually think you went there, you loved it. What was the difference?
Wouldn't have said I loved it, because in the early days it was rough, and Cardiff was rough as well. But again, Thomas went to those tracks and he couldn't handle it because he wasn't riding in Britain at the time. And all of a sudden it threw a whole different level of rival up for the night. Obviously, Tony could ride Cardiff, Tony could ride anywhere, but Greg was struggling in the Grand Prix at that time, but you go to Cardiff on a choppy old bag of nails track, and all of a sudden Greg's up there again because he's a motorbike rider, and I thought it wasn't fun. It wasn't great racing. Guys were making mistakes. I mean, Scott, that night, I pick up, clout the fence across the, nearly take your front wheel off and go over the starting line, end up on the centre green. And I was riding good. I mean, I ended up winning the Grand Prix that night, but one instant, my night could have been over. Through my mistake, I could have ruined your night, and we're both out for 4 weeks because we're injured. And, that was the edge of Cardiff at that time. It was the margins were, that they were that. And
they were a concentration test as much as a skill test for a speedway rider.
Huge concentration test, a mental game to be actually able to hold the throttle on and get into the corner with the throttle on, and then a fitness and physique and body position test for 4 laps, because even that race, I had the race won. There's 60 meters in it to go, and I nearly make the biggest mistake anybody could make in the meeting. And like I said, I was at the top of my game at that point, just about.
That's why it kind of. So when I asked earlier about the package between the rider with the bike setup and the weight, that's kind of more where I was going, is that tracks like that, all that goes out the window. It's more down to the rider ability and everything else. And that's why I just felt, yes, we're grateful that with the current situation we've got the Grand Prix, but I feel some of these tracks where I do feel like your Zmarzliks, your Lagutas have got that advantage over perhaps Doyley, Zagar, because in that game it's the 1% and 2% of what will make the difference. And I feel that those tracks, they're exceptionally good riders. I mean, what Zmarzlik does on a bike is just mind-blowing. I mean, I've never seen anyone like it. But I just feel if you chuck... I mean, he could still ride Cardiff, no question. But like you say, there's a few of the other boys, like Madsen, would probably struggle on those tracks. And I think that would then hand it over to those other guys.
Yeah, I probably tend to agree with you with that. We've seen, Zmarzlik's been good at Cardiff in the past, and Janowski's been good at Cardiff in the past. Probably be a good test for Artem. I mean, we sit here and say that he wouldn't do it, but I kind of looked at it and thought Voyens would be a tough one for him to go to, but he's gone out and done it there as well. So, as I said earlier on, the best riders in the world are still the best riders in the world.
Can we just backtrack a little bit while we're talking about that for you? I know that, finishing second in the world 3 times, and then you won the world title for the first time in 2004. Was that as much relief and vindication for what Jason Crump was doing as a rider?
A relief, yes. The reward for probably quite a few years of hard work and a lot of effort as well. So it was very emotional to finally win it. And you say to finally win it, I mean, I'd been in the Grand Prix and I'd been a top rider for quite a while at that stage, and you have these doubts creep into your mind and you think, is it ever going to happen? But you've got to keep pushing. It's your career, it's your job, it's what you dreamed of as a child. It's it wasn't just a commitment that I put in, it was a commitment that Mel put in and the kids put in, and my mechanics and different people at the time, the help that was given to me and support that I had. I wasn't the only one that deserved to win the World Championship. I was just lucky that I was the one that got to pick the trophy up, really.
You mentioned that, though, as a from a child thing, and one of the things we talk about on Speed Freaks a lot is where the desire came from. Was Jason Crump with Granddad Neil and Dad Phil, were you always going to be a speedway rider?
Probably. I loved speedway from going to the meetings with the old boy to getting to meet, Michael Lee or Peter Collins or Bruce Penhall or Bobby Schwartz, all those guys. And, it went on and on from those guys because, I got to know guys like you, Steve, when you were helping Larry, and, relationships go back a long way. Craig Cummings that now works for Oldlands. I remember him when he started to help Sean Moran. He's only a little older than me. He used to give me stickers, and it's what you dreamed of. You Scott, you had Cookie and Siggy at Ipswich, and I'm sure they were huge influences on making you want to be a speedway rider because they were personalities. They were fun people. They did things that you went, yeah, that's what I want to do. I want to be able to give the kids stickers. I want to be able to sign their autographs. I want to have a different set of leathers, whatever it is. But that's what made me want to be a speedway rider was all those things.
Oh, no question. Yeah, like you said, Cookie and stuff. I mean, it's just, they were idols of heroes. You look at them and you're like, man, I want to be like that. Who were your idol? Who did you look up to when you was a young kid? Obviously your dad, I expect, but obviously...
Yeah, of course, because he's your dad and you see him go and race against all these, superstars of speedway. So, yeah, of course, my dad was my hero. But, looking at others, of course, Pennell came on the scene. I was probably, 5-6 years old when he won the World Championship. But you remember, because he had cool leathers and his helmet had the American flag on it. And, and Schwartzy was different because his helmet was black and yellow, the Bumblebee, and, all those guys. And then I was very fortunate that, Per Jonsson and Jimmy Nielsen came to England, and they live 5 minutes from us in Swindon. So as I got older, I got to meet these guys, and then all of a sudden I'm bloody over here racing with them. And there were those guys, but then there was a whole different group of guys that actually, in my early days of speedway, guys like Mick Poole and Stephen Davies that were, friends from Aussie, and I end up at Peterborough with them, and we become, what they did for me in those days. I will never forget. We're friends to this day, good friends. I still have messages and calls with them all regularly, and so they became heroes to me as well in different ways.
What we'll do is we're definitely going to carry on. We're going to go rewind back and back and back. But just before we do that, at this point, we have a little feature called Talent with a Talent. It's obviously brought to you by TPI. So do you have another talent that we can witness on screen, Jason? If you don't, Brando might help you out.
Do you know what? I'm sure, Stephen, we did go-karting and stuff like that all the time in Northampton, and Stephen's probably got something that's going to really embarrass me. But I think I'm just like a really boring person because I've ridden motorbikes my whole life. If you weren't on here, Scott, I could say I was okay on a motocross bike, but that's a lie because you've seen me ride one.
I was going to say, you could ride a motocross bike. Like me, maybe not that great, but it's still a talent, I suppose.
Do you know what I'd love to be? One of my favourite things is tennis, and I am absolutely rubbish at tennis. Stephen, you know that. I used to go and have lessons in Northampton to try and improve my game. I love tennis. I love watching tennis. I love the mental side of tennis. It's such a, I love it because they have even less time than a speedway rider to get their together. And, they lose a match point, and 10 seconds later, they've got another match point to win the biggest game. So they could have made a stupid error. And in 10 seconds, they've got to clear their head and go again. I think I'll let
Brando give you a little bit of a talent with a talent thing, which I think is quite cool. But what you're talking about is interesting. Are you super competitive, whatever you play? Like when Seth was a kid and Mia, did you ever let them win, or was it purely like you got to earn it?
Oh, they got to earn it. They got to earn it. I actually think that like half the world's gone soft because like when they're little at school and that, they play a game of rugby and they don't win, they don't lose, they play a game of hockey. Well, that to me, that's bloody rubbish. Like it's
Fail a maths test.
Yeah, exactly. You fail your driving test, you don't get a driver's license. So there's the first kick in the nuts that you get when you're going for something. So yeah, no, you got to win.
You can fail your driving test, but you're not allowed to come last in a running race. Go figure that.
Yeah.
My talent, well, the talent thing is to put you on the spot to be a world champion spotter. This is the last one of the series. It's going out the night before the double header in Torren. We've mentioned them before, but we've got Laguta with a 1-point lead, Smarslik just behind. Who's best placed to become the first ever Russian world champion or a 3-time world champion in a row and equal either major?
You've given me a hard question, haven't you? A world championship spotter. Bloody hell. My heart says Laguta because he's taken it to Smarslik this year, but I think my head says Smarslik. So I would go with Bartos, but you're splitting hairs, aren't you? It can be.
It's amazing, and as a rider, I don't think we've ever seen, or I watch it, you guys rode in it. I don't think we've ever seen a championship we haven't, that's been this close right down to the wire. They're dominating. They're so far ahead of everyone else, but it's win for win, race win for race win.
It deserves to be a runoff with a dead heat at the end of it.
Yeah. It's almost that close because it's very hard to split them. I mean,
yeah, it is because you look at the both of the riding techniques and you say Bartos is better at this, but then you can counteract and say Artem's better at that. The only difference I see between them is that Artem seems to make 9 starts out of 10. Bartos makes 8.
And that runoff, if that comes to a runoff, that could be unbelievably so important.
At a track like Torren, and you watch the Grand Prix from Torren or you watch a race meeting from Torren and you actually don't get to understand the angles of the track. You must notice that, Scott. Like you go to Torren and you see that there's a little bit of shape to the track, but unless you're there, you walk it or you ride it, you actually have no appreciation for the different angles and the cambers and everything that are on that track. And I think Per designed that track actually, and I always said to him, it's the hardest place in the world to ride, and he just laughed at me every time I said it to him, because you can be out in front there and go, I haven't made a mistake in 3 laps, and then somebody goes past you like you're a novice.
Do you know, I've not been fortunate enough to ride the new Torren. I wish I had because it looks mega, but the one when I first went there and covered a Grand Prix, and I stood in the pits and I saw them as practice. I saw them come out of that first and second bend and rattle, and you see the fence rattles as they go past. Holy, do you know, like, you're a racer, Jason. I'm a racer still as well, but it gave me goosebumps. I was like, man alive, the speed they come off that corner, and when they come past and you see that fence rattle, that's if a fan could experience that would be pretty amazing.
Yeah. Absolutely agree 100%. And you see all of that stuff, and I don't know what you think, but when I think of that, I think, I wonder if I ever went past and made that fence rattle.
Mm-hmm. I was stood there several times when you did.
Mate, with my belly, there'd have been such a vacuum behind, the fence would have fell apart. All right, so we're going to keep rewinding backwards. So let's stay with the now a little bit. You've come back, had a long time out. What was the driving force behind you wanting to come back to racing?
Ian from ATPI had some meetings on in Perth, and I think it was January 2020. It must have been, yeah. That's when it was. So we'd had Dan Bewley, Tom Brennan, and Zach Wojciak had been to our place in Aussie. Ian sends the young boys over, and they have their summer racing in Aussie. Anyway, they're all talking to me. Oh, it'd be good for you to ride, and blah blah blah. And anyway, I kind of put it off. a week before the meeting, Ian calls me and he says, look, we've got a bit of a problem getting riders to go because they've just finished the Australian Championship and blah, blah, blah. There was a few of the bigger named Aussie guys that had kind of committed, but then went back on what they decided. So Ian said, we basically need you to go and ride against Ty and Dan and the rest of the English boys that are over there. Mate, I didn't even have a race suit that I could get done up at that point.
Fortunately, Kevlar stretches.
Not that much. So anyway, I because Ian's Ian, I end up off I go and go over to Perth and have a great weekend with Jono, and do a couple of speedway meetings, and actually went kind of okay. Anyway, by the time I came back from Perth, I got home and Tiger calls me and says, what do you think? And I kind of laughed it off. And then, you kind of start thinking about it. And then the next question is, what are we going to do with this and how are we going to do that? And, fortunately, there's some good supporters at Ipswich. Obviously, I've had a long relationship with Guy and the True 7 group. And obviously as well, Seth was coming over here to race. And Chris kind of said to me, Seth's coming over to race in the BSB. You can look at it. You got a Monday and a Thursday. It's very structured. Your weekends aren't impeded at all. Have a go. And we'll see what we can get your average down to. And, the average I was given was probably a little unfair. But then when you look at what my average was, I guess you couldn't go much lower. So
you were quite good.
Yeah, well, I didn't actually realise.
You did have a pretty good average because you weren't good.
Yeah, it's taken a bit of a knock this year, but my average was actually
your body as well.
Yeah, my green sheet average from when I finished riding in England was over 11, believe it or not. So they did knock a bit off it, but still to come back into the team at number one was pretty tough. But that's another story. So that's basically how it started, Scott. And like yourself, I've ridden motocross bikes. I do training with, I do coach the Queensland Motorcycle Police on riding techniques and different things. So it's not like I wasn't riding motorbikes a lot. I just wasn't riding my speedway bike a lot. Did a lot of flat tracking with Troy and with Bayless and Super Motard and fair bit of different riding. But it just seemed like I went to those meetings there with no expectations, thought I'd just get hosed. And I was quite happy because I beat Bewley a few times. And, obviously Ty was a different kettle of fish. You're talking about an old fellow at 85 kilos racing against one of the best guys in the world. And I did actually manage to beat him to the first corner once, but after that, he was nowhere to be seen. But it kind of made me realize that riding the bike was fun. And I liked the build up. I liked talking with all the young fellas through the meeting. And, as you know as well, I'm involved with the coaching side, the academy stuff over here, which is, it makes, I come away from a day with Drew Kemp and Tom Brennan and Anders Rowe and all these kids, Leon Flint, and I feel like I'm 25 again. They're 18, 19, 20, and you spend time with them and you talk to them and you listen to what they're saying and what they're going through. And you to try and help them, and you all of a sudden a week later I'm lining up at the tapes against him, or I'm teammates with Anders. He's my partner at Kings Lynn. Drew's in the same team, and Bellevue come down and Tom's riding for them. I think they tend to listen a little more when you line up at the tapes with them, especially if you get one over them. So there's lots of reasons for it, but ultimately it comes back to Ian, ATPI Ian, and him getting me to do the meeting, and Mel will never let him forget that.
I was going to ask that question. How did that conversation go when you said, I'm off to Perth and I'm going to ride my speedway bike again?
Well, Mel knew it because Ian obviously had been on the phone and she was listening in on the conversation. And I think she said at the time to Ian, you better be bloody careful what you start here, Ian, because it could end up anywhere. But I've had a very long, enjoyable, successful partnership with Ian and ATPI going back to 2007. And he's Ian and Alison have become more than just a sponsor or a company I'm associated with. They're friends, and we enjoy their company, and hopefully they enjoy ours as well.
Yeah, Ian's definitely a good guy and put a lot into the sport, this show.
Yeah.
How is has your mentality and your approach to your racing changed now that you've come back? Have you got more of a relaxed approach to it, or is there still that burning desire inside there?
I lost the burning desire in about 2012, Scott. Honestly, I didn't feel like I wanted to be world champion anymore. And it was a difficult thing to understand at the time because I'd only ever raced to be world champion. And I didn't really understand that you could race to, one, earn a living, and two, to have a bit of enjoyment and just kind of roll around. And it was really difficult. And at the end of 2012, when I knew I didn't want to be world champion, it was very easy for us just to pack up and go home because we'd been away for a long time. Mia was starting high school. It just kind of happened that the whole racing stopped very quickly. We went home at the end of the year. She started school. Seth was a few years younger, so he wasn't quite in high school at that time. And anyway, the time I had off, the kids actually finished high school at the same school every day, in the same country, and they don't need school anymore. So we thought we'd come back and have a go. But the side of, do I go there with the same attitude? Yeah, I want to go there and do as well as I can, but the level for me used to be here, and to do as well as I can now, the level's about there. And I can accept that. I had a few decent meetings, and I had some crappy ones as well. But all in all, I was number one for the majority of the season in the team for Ipswich, which was tough. You go to Wolverhampton off gate 3 or 4 in Heat 1 against Luke Becker and Sam Masters. That was a tough race 10 years ago or 15 years ago. So in 2021 for me at 45, 46, that becomes a bloody hard race. And I didn't underestimate the level of competition, but being at number one, I think I did a little bit. And I would have been much more happy at number 3 or 4 through the course of the season.
Yeah, but I think also, like what you said earlier, is that, you've been out for a long time, so there's a lot of new riders come here that, a bit like in Poland, there's riders that I've never heard of, and you go there and they kick your ass. But England is very unique. The riders are good on home soil. We've seen a lot of top riders come here in their peak and get beaten by a rider that we might regard as a second string or like a second heat leader. So it is bloody hard league to come and compete in.
Yeah, it is. It still is. And the rest of the speedway world look at it and say that, England don't have Grand Prix riders, so the league cannot be strong. But that's a bit of a blinkered view on British Speedway, because I firmly believe, and this is no disrespect to any of these guys, but you could take the top 10 from the Grand Prix and put them in Heat 1 at Wolverhampton against the riders I've just mentioned off gate 4 or gate 3, whatever it is. The result wouldn't be that different than me going off gate 3 or 4 initially, because it takes a bit of time to weigh it up and to understand what you need to do and where you need to ride.
100% agree. I remember when Ty came back, and Wolverhampton, a track that he knew inside out, and it took him a few meetings to get back in the flow of it and to get into that again.
A simple thing, like I noticed it a lot this year, and I go to Plymouth, right? You've ridden at Plymouth, Scott. Now, when the green light comes on and you look at the tapes, part of what you have to do is actually not just look at the tapes, but when you drop the clutch within about 1 second, you actually got to get prepared for the corner. So in the space of a second and a half, you've gone from looking at the green light to looking at the tapes to reacting to that, controlling the bike, but also getting ready for the first corner. And that bit of that 1.5 to 2 seconds, let's say, there's not many tracks in the world, take America out of it, but where could you say that Bartos or Artem's ever ridden where they've had to deal with that?
Not with 3 other guys trying to do the same thing. That's you can do that in practice, but it doesn't, like we talked before about guys not racing enough. The racing thing in that environment with those different requirements is something that I think a lot of them would benefit from consistency wise.
This is another thing, and we talk about the Speedway here. There's a lot of negativity around British Speedway at the moment. And some of it's justified, of course, but there's also a lot of it that's not. I'm a huge fan of British Speedway, always have been. I think that the education riders get from racing at Newcastle, at Plymouth, at Leicester, Edinburgh. I mean, the different things you have to be able to do on a bike and the different things you have to do to that bike when you get back to the pits to make it rideable. The education in that is next level, right? So I know the Polish are saying that the top boys can only ride in one league, but I was thinking the other day, I was driving along in my car and I was thinking to myself, what's something that could be a real positive for British Speedway? And if I was in charge of, or not in charge, but if I was involved with the BSPA, you know what I'd do? I'd go to Poland and I'd say to the Polish extra league clubs, and no disrespect to these guys, but you look at Wrocław, Leguta, Woofenden, Magic, Dan Bewley, Chuganov. Who are the next 2 guys in the team? They can bloody hardly slide sometimes, right? They've got Greg in there, and Greg's going to help develop these young fellas. But why doesn't British Speedway go to Poland and say, instead of you having these guys practicing riding around 4 or 5 days a week, give us 2 riders. Every club in the extra league, give us your bottom 2 riders or the young kids or whatever. Give them to us. Send them to England with 2 bikes. We'll put them in a championship or a premiership team. We'll educate them for a couple of years, but you got to pay that. You got to pay their wages. They're club riders, Scott. The bikes are supplied by the clubs in Poland. They're paid by the clubs in Poland. Bring them over. Don't work against Poland, that's the highest paying, biggest speedway league in the world. Don't do that. Work with them. Develop riders here, because England's a developing place. And in the long run, that'll bring more riders to England. England will be, again, for example, what do Australian riders do to become better? We leave Australia and come to England.
But then that's so interesting. But that's a problem. We could go off on a tangent, but instead of working together, everybody just works against each other. And 100% agree. You've just said it. Darcy Ward said it. Greg Hancock said it. Coming to England was the best thing that they could have done for their career. They learned so much here that they could take to Poland. And I'm the same as well. I'm think that the British riders need to spend time in Poland, because the place notoriously over the years, with the exception of probably Lee Richardson, British riders have struggled in Poland because they've not experienced. So it's almost you need to do the two. I mean, I think we should go to Poland and have test matches early season for the riders to gain the experience of the bigger tracks. But I think you look at, take the current crop like Mars League, you look at the best riders in the world, yourself, Tony Rickards, etc., etc. They all spent a big chunk of their career here.
If you look at the history of the World Championship, there's only really been 2 or 3 riders that have not been educated in British Speedway that have gone on. I mean, Egon Muller wasn't, but that, you know, his World Championship, he won the World Championship. That's one.
I think even he though admits, Jason, that he earned a lot from the brief times he spent riding Speedway here. So
well, definitely
something in there helped him.
But you know, that, as I say, that's one, right? Shakiel's another that won in Poland. Thomas spent time in the UK at different points of his career, but Thomas was Thomas, and he was going to win the world championship at least once in his career, whatever happened. And then you go to Bartos, all the rest of us in the modern era, Greg, Tony, Billy, myself, Nicky. Nicky went to Newcastle. I mean,
yeah,
you got. And Nicky took a lot of shit as a rider. He was a hard and he was, probably 50% of everything he did was a little bit over the edge. We've all copped it from Nicky at different times, but to be fair, I gave a fair bit back to him as well. But Nicky got off his ass from Denmark and went to Newcastle. I went to Newcastle this year. I got 5 points, and
Tough
I came
place.
away and said, I was trying. I didn't go there to score 5 points. I wanted to score 10 points. I rode my nuts off. I tried my ass off. And that was all I could do that day, because it is a hard place to go to. Max Clegg, Adam Roynan, Paul Stark, James Wright, Ben Barker, they are hard guys to beat at Newcastle.
Just before we get to the last lap questions and have a little bit of fun, just real quickly, where and when did Jason Crump start his racing career? When was the first time you got on a motorcycle? And what is your first memories of kind of feeling that buzz of riding a bike?
I think I got my first... Phil actually owned the Honda shop in Mildura. So I got my first Honda Z50 for Christmas, I think 1981 or 82. So I was 6 years old. And then, of course, growing up in the country, you ride your motorbike. My granddad he was a fruit grower. He grew grapes. So plenty of land. I'd go there and ride my motorbike until it had no fuel left in it, and push it back and get more fuel in it so I could keep riding it. And that's what life was there, And then I started Speedway in 1986, Junior Speedway. And from then on, it was, I was better at Speedway than motocross. And that's what I wanted. That's what I wanted to do.
Do you remember the feeling that for me, the first kind of remember is when it was wet. It was actually in my mum and dad's back garden, but I kind of got the back end out, and it was like, there's that feeling that you can't, it's hard to describe the feeling, but it was such a buzz, just like, man, have I got the back end out? Do you remember that first feeling for you?
Well, what we used to do, Scott, was Lee and his brother Andrew Adams, their grandmother lived actually in the same street that we lived in Aussie. So we had a polished concrete driveway. So you put water on it. We used to put water on it. And when Phil used to go away, we used to get some degreaser out of his tank and put the degreaser down in water so it was slippery. So we used to ride our push bikes up the road flat out, swing into the driveway, and you could, because it was so slippery, you'd try and slide it all the way around the driveway. So all of that sort of stuff we did as kids. And I can remember, like, talking about it now, I can remember the feeling. And I can't remember it actually on a motorbike though.
It's weird, isn't it? Well, I hope there's no track raters watching now, because they'll be giving us grief if we ever moan about it being wet, because they'll be like...
Well, if I can talk for a minute about that, I think that if coming back to Speedway in England this year, and I'm sorry to all the track curators out there and the track men and women, but the biggest difference I noticed from 10, 12 years ago when I rode in the UK was track preparation. And I think that, again, there's negativity around Speedway. There should be more positivity. But please, BSPA and trackmen, make a consistent track. Make it so that the riders have somewhere to go and work. Make it so that the riders have a track that they can trust. Because as soon as riders have a track they can trust, you get much better racing.
Well, it's a stage, isn't it?
Yeah.
The artist, and that's the stage to perform on.
Yeah. You'd have to agree with that, Scott, and say
100%.
There's good tracks you go to. I mean, I went to Redcar this year. We did a northern tour, right? We went Edinburgh Friday night. Now, Edinburgh, I'd never been there before. I couldn't say it's a bad track. It's a tricky, very, very tricky. The night we were there, it was full grip, but it was smooth. And if you used a good riding technique and you got the thing turned on the way into the corner, you could go pretty decent there. It was consistently grippy. So I thought that was great. The next night we went to Berwick. Now, Berwick's a big track, but the Courtney boys, in my opinion, are doing a fantastic job there. The first and second bend, which is not so banked, it was slicker. Big old straights there, aren't they? But the pit bend where they've got a bit of room there's room for the riders. The outside of that turn had a bit of grip on it. So I came away from there and thought, that's good. That's good preparation. That's thinking about where there's a bit of room and where there's not. So the trickier end was slicker. The open end had a bit more dirt on it. Starts were very even. The next day I go to Redcar, and mate, that was like a dream. That was like the best track I'd ridden on up until that point of being here. And all of a sudden, 3 nights in a row on 3 completely different tracks, because there's nothing similar about those tracks at all, apart from the fact that you go left at the end of the straight. And then, I don't want to mention names, but then the next track I went to just let itself down. And you see it with the riders. Both teams go and walk the track, and all of a sudden everybody's like, what am I going to do here? What sprocket should I put on, Jason? What should I do with this? What should I do with that? I don't know. I'm wondering myself, but that's the difference of going to tracks that are prepared well and the riders look at and know that they can go and have fun.
100%. Do you know, I think it's, when I look at the Grand Prix, there's some tracks, 2 that always pick out. Prague, you've ridden Prague, Lublin. They're not the best racetracks. They're quite difficult to pass on, but I don't think there's any track in the world that's a bad racetrack if it's prepared right. You prepare the track according to the track. And if you've got the right grip and material in the right place, you can race anywhere. So yeah, I 100% agree with what you're saying.
I actually never rode at Lublin. I've never been to Lublin, but Prague, I agree with you. Prague's got no room down the straights, never has had. And the faster the bikes go, the smaller that track is. But I thought the Grand Prix there this year, the Sunday afternoon one, I thought that was fantastic. I can't really remember seeing a better Grand Prix there.
And that's it. And it's when the track is prepared and enables riders to race.
Yeah.
Then you get delivered the goods.
What's your opinion on, because the practice format's changed, hasn't it, with the Grand Prix? So what actually happens now with the practice? Because I know, like Friday, we used to wreck the track all day Friday and expect them to redo it for a good show on Saturday. So that's changed a bit, hasn't it?
It's different everywhere. Like Saturday at Voyen's just gone. I think practice was 5:00, but with public in the stadium on the Saturday afternoon for half an hour. So, again, some rounds there haven't been. Some rounds there's been a quick practice in the afternoon. I think a lot of it, particularly where there's been Polish League racing on the Friday, they're all tied up. But, there definitely don't appear to be too many now where we have that, like you've said, Jason, an hour and a half of just absolutely destroying the track on a Friday afternoon. So
yeah,
is that a good thing, a bad thing?
I think it's a good thing, because, we all...
Did you like practice?
Yeah, I did like practice, but would I have liked it better at 5:00 on a Saturday afternoon? Yeah, probably. Because we, half the time we went there and we only went out actually, and you probably do all your work in the first 2 or 3 sessions that you go out in, and then the rest of the day you just go out because you actually have track time. So condensing it and saving the track and looking at it from that side, I think it's probably a huge positive. Look at Cardiff, think of when there was 24 riders at Cardiff with 6 2-minute sessions per rider. That's a lot of laps, because 2 minutes straight away, 2 minutes is 2 races.
On a brand new track.
I think those days in the knockout system, practice was equivalent to 2.5 race meetings.
Yeah, exactly.
So you go to Cardiff, they do 2.5 race meetings on a Friday, and then try and make it a racetrack for 24 hours or 28 hours later. It's a big ask.
And I don't recall a Grand Prix where I went out in practice and went out in my first race with the exact setup that I wanted. 9 times out of 10, you come in and go, oh crap, it's way slicker than practice. I've got to drop a 2 straight away. So practice almost went out the window. So
yeah, I agree. I mean, practice was good if you just fitted a new engine or you wanted to, if there was a reason to practice, it was good. Apart from that, I mean, we must have done thousands and thousands of laps of Grand Prix tracks for practice. It just didn't even get logged with anything in the world and probably got no information from riding from.
And then got a load of stupid questions from me at the end of it. Brilliant.
Sometimes they were the best part of practice, Stephen.
Oh, thanks, Jace. You're very kind.
Well, I tell you what, there's one thing that you've not got any practice for, Jason, and that's the last lap questions that are coming up now.
Okay.
So I hope you're ready. So we're going to kick off. The first one, these are all just a bit of fun, mate, and there's no right or wrong answer, and we can edit it. But if it's really bad, then we don't edit it. So we're going to start with a classic, is the Snog, Marry, Avoid. And your 3 hotties are Camilla Parker Bowles, Susan Boyle, or Nicola Sturgeon.
I don't know them. Who are they? Camilla
Parker Bowles is
Charles' wife.
Prince Charlie's, yeah. Susan Boyle won the singing contest from Scotland. I can't even Google your picture. And Nicola Sturgeon is the Scottish lady in charge.
Bloody hell!
We have to pick some new ones then, Brando. Who else can we pick?
Can't I just stay with my wife? Because she's been around for a long time, and everybody knows her. Everybody knows that she's perfect for me.
So you're going to snog, marry? Well, you can't. How can you snog, marry, and avoid Mel?
I know. I'll snog and marry Mel and avoid all the others. How's that?
There you go. He's covered it well.
Right. We'll move on then. Are you a member of the Mile High Club, sir?
Oh my God, Stephen! You all know my wife. I can't answer that.
And he wanted to ask that question. He said, "I have to ask him number 2."
Yes.
I'll message.
And I knew that was the answer you were going to give, so it all fell into place.
This one works out really well as the conversation we had earlier, Jason. So, what does this acronym not stand for? So, what does BSPA not stand for? So, you've got to make up something that BSPA stands for.
Promoters Association.
I said, what does it not stand for?
Oh, okay. It stand for British Speedway Promoters Association.
Nailed it. We know who your Snog, Marry, Avoid is, but who was your first celebrity crush?
Daisy Duke.
Oh, everyone loved Daisy.
That was my era, wasn't it?
Okay. Well, I think we might know the answer to this one, Brando, because he's going to score some points here. What's better, sex or winning a race?
Well, win a Grand Prix and then go home with your wife.
Another good answer. So once you've won the Grand Prix, gone home with your wife, socks on in bed, yes or no?
Socks on in bed? No way. Oh, I suppose if you're sick, if you've got the flu, socks on, tucked into your pajamas with Vicks rubbed all over your chest. Yeah, socks on. 99% of the time, socks off.
He's covered every option possible so far, with everything.
He's got splinters.
All right, have you ever weed in the shower?
Oh, all the time.
There you go.
So,
short and sweet.
What are you scared of?
Snakes.
I think I would be. And lastly, are you a texter or a caller?
Oh, cool.
Old school. Like it. Right. So then...
So if I put my phone up on the screen, can you see a snake? That I can show you a snake that we actually saw just maybe 300 meters from our house just before we were
really?
leaving. Yeah.
I won't look at it. It might give me an honest.
Oh!
What?
Just on a residential road?
Yeah. And that's a wide road. That's not a country lane.
That's a wide snake.
Yeah, that's probably it was probably close to 3 meters long.
I say, you're looking at 9-10 foot. Jesus Christ.
Not having much fun with that.
No. Okay. Right.
Don't have too many of those in Northampton, fortunately.
No. So you're going to have your phone ready any second, Jason, because now we're going, not just yet, I'm going to send you your tongue twister any second. So we've got the Rude Tongue Twister Roulette. So we've got 6 choices. So they are, number 1 is a pheasant plucker. Number 2 is...
That's a beer, isn't it?
Sorry?
Isn't pheasant plucker a beer or a cider or something?
Well, you might be able to say it better after you've had a few. The second one is Puggy Wuggy. Third one is Fig Plucker. Fourth is Sock Cutter. Fifth is Mother Hunt. And the last one is Susie Sitting. So is there any there that are tickling your bits?
I haven't got a clue what they are, mate.
Right, well, we're going to find out. So we're going to roll the dodgy dice. And they're going to roll now. And we're going to see which one you've got come up. So I'm quite interested. As you said, Pheasant Plucker.
I thought that was a beer.
Well, as it happens, you have got Pheasant Plucker, which is number 1. So I'm just going to ping you over the Pheasant Plucker now. So if you have a look on your phone, you should have. And as you don't like practice, there's no practice, Jason. So you're straight in as fast as you can.
Okay.
Read her out.
I'm not a pheasant plucker, but a pheasant plucker's son. And I'll sit here plucking pheasants till the pheasant's plucking's done.
Let's have another go really quick.
I'm not a pheasant plucker, but a pheasant plucker's son, and I'll sit here plucking pheasants till the pleasant plucking's done.
Nearly are.
Very good. Very good, sir.
Yeah. Well done, mate. Well, you've passed with flying colours. Thanks a lot for joining us, mate. It's been a real pleasure having a chat with you and hearing all about it. And I'll see you at the races soon.
No worries.
Thanks, Jason. Great to see you, mate.
See you guys.
Well, it's brilliant to hear from Jason Crump, obviously a successful rider and also pretty good at doing last lap questions. Thoroughly enjoyed chatting to him. Well, that's the end of Series 1, but Series 2 will be coming to you. So make sure and follow us on all the socials that will be at the end of the show. And fire any questions, any ideas you've got. We want to make the second series bigger and better than the first, but thoroughly enjoyed it and hope you tune in for the next one. What are your thoughts, Brando?
Yeah, I mean, Jason, a great guest, and we've only got sort of 24, 48 hours now to find out whether his heart, Artem Laguta, or his head, Bartosz Marslik, lifts the 2021 world title. Time will tell on that one. But it's been great fun to be involved, and thank you for that. And as Scotty says, any ideas, anyone you think you'd like to hear us talking to or see us talking to, just let us know, and we'll see you soon.
ATPI, delivering what really matters.